right there, right?
It is.
I want to get one.
Oh, you need one.
Well, I'm glad you said that. So I was hoping that you would fund it for me.
Oh, well, that's not a problem.
Great. I'll give you my address.
How have y'all been doing?
Huh?
How are y'all doing?
We're doing well, man. You know, our first class graduates tomorrow.
Yes.
And I'm sure you've heard we are accredited by the Katy.
Nice. I did.
Yeah, and so they go take their boards in June. And away we go.
There you go. Perfect. Ooh,
yeah.
Silence that.
That is
that is not my theme music.
No, but I know who that is. Can we forget about the things when I was lost?
You're smart.
Yeah, I did. Who is that? I didn't mean to call you that.
Lit.
All right.
All right. So we ready?
You ready? I'm ready to go when you are, sir.
All right.
Absolutely.
Do I need to put on a headset or I'm okay?
You should be okay. I mean, you can hear.
Yeah.
I'm just like you there.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go in 3, 2, 1. What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Sports Medicine Broadcast number 220, Legal Concerns in the Secondary Setting. We got Josh Yellen, Dr. Josh Yellen. They are getting ready to graduate their first class from the Masters of Athletic Training program at the University of Houston. So congratulations to you, Dr. Yellen.
Thank you, sir.
And on the recent news of the accreditation, so our full go, and then those kids will be all ready to go. So I'm excited to see what comes out of the rest of U of H from you and Dr.
You and me both.
And then joining us on Skype or on Google Hangout, we have Josh Woodall. We were going to be joined by our school legal counsel, but of course they got scheduled for something else. So Josh is the president of SWATA. He is quite knowledgeable on the legal aspect of having a student athletic trainer, helper, worker, aide, whatever you want to call them, program. And we're just going to be discussing some of the legal concerns or legal issues we may face in having students help with basically doing our job. So I am the host, Jeremy Jackson, of the Sports Medicine Broadcast. This episode will be sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/legal concerns. Again, sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/legal concerns. And so if you check that check the website there, that's where we'll have all these show notes and links to all this other stuff. So Josh Woodall, why don't you say hello real quick?
Hello, and thank you for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here.
All right. So real quick, Woodall, why don't you give us a brief overview why we have you on here, why you are one of our experts in dealing with legal concerns.
Absolutely. Well, so my name is Josh Woodall, as stated, and I'm the head athletic trainer at Bryan High School in Bryan, Texas, but I'm also the president of the Southwest Athletic Trainers Association. And we are obviously a district of the National Athletic Trainers Association, who has put out the recent statements regarding student athletic training aids and the proper use thereof. So that's why I'm here on the show today, to just kind of discuss some of the appropriate uses of student athletic training aids at the secondary school level and what that looks like.
All right, and Woodall, I'm going to try and say Woodall because it's also Josh Yellen. So I'm trying to say Woodall each time. Are you employed at Bryan ISD as a teacher, or are you on administrative contract?
I am on an administrative contract. So I work full year, 226-day contract with the school district. And I won't say my sole responsibility is athletic training. I have a lot of other duties as assigned, but I am not a classroom teacher. I'm employed as an athletic trainer.
So for those people that are listening, if you're not familiar with the high school-based athletic trainer, and this was a lesson that I learned coming from California. I started my career actually doing outreach. I'd done outreach for probably 11 years, and that thrust me into the understanding of the different contracts that athletic trainers have at various secondary schools, etc. So for those that are tuning in for the first time, Josh, can you explain a little bit about the difference between the two contracts? Because I'm not quite sure that we have athletic trainers in the state that understand their contracts.
Sure, yes. And actually, this is an interesting topic for me because I haven't always been on an administrative contract. When I was hired in Bryan back in 2002, I was hired as a teacher. Had a standard teacher contract, 187 days with a stipend for athletic training. So very similar to what coaches have. And I did have teaching responsibilities at the time, and they paid me extra days to kind of cover some of the additional days that are worked over holidays, weekends, etc.
And did those, I'm going to kind of interject here. Did those days push you to a standard 207 days a year?
Let's see. At the time, I was on a 187 and 15 days. So
it gets you just short. So you're at 202.
Right.
Okay.
So that was kind of how things started out. Both my position and the assistant athletic trainer's position were the same way. We were both on standard teaching contract. What's happened over the years is as things have changed, I had to make a reasonable argument for my position to be changed due to the fact that we have a lot of things going on over the summers, and I was constantly being called to come to work over the summers, be in the office, be available for students, or to help with other administrative needs. And over time, my contract evolved into a administrative contract rather than a standard teacher contract.
And can you talk a little bit about how you strategized and formulated your argument to move from a standard teacher contract stipend to an administrative contract, and some of the pros and cons that you experienced with that?
Yeah. So the way that I presented that to my administration was the simple fact that although the student aspect, the games, the practices, those things are conducted during the school year, and during that time that I was contracted as a classroom, there were a lot of responsibilities that continued on into the summer. So I demonstrated that we had summer strength and conditioning camps where students were on site lifting weights or doing conditioning activities, and injuries occurred during those times, and we needed appropriate health care for those practices and events. I demonstrated that students needed to get copies of their physicals to go to camps, and because those are medical records, they're under lock and key and no one has access to those. So a coach couldn't simply come in and make a copy of a form. That was something that I had to be here to do. So I've made these arguments to the staff or to the administration and showed that there was a legitimate reason that I needed to be on site and available beyond the typical school year. I didn't immediately go on to a full year contract. They toyed with other methods. I was extended to a 212-day contract, which is kind of similar to what some of our assistant principals are on. Mm-hmm. Ultimately found that the full year contract was the most beneficial for both parties.
So when you start to formulate your discussion, and I'm sure that you have to submit like an executive summary to, your principal and to your superintendent and district. So when you start to formulate those thoughts, you say that you're tracking EMRs, you're tracking strength conditioning. The NATA's got some really good information up on their site about value, the value model in both college and university and secondary. So explain just a little bit some of the metrics that you started to create and track, because I'm sure that helped you. I'm sure that helped you with your case of transitioning.
Yes. So what we did is we demonstrated the number of events that are hosted on site or in our school throughout the course of the year. So we counted the actual number of events, and we showed that those extended beyond the school year. Showing that we had open gyms, we have the open weight room, we have the open track facilities, things like that. So the first thing that we did was demonstrate that we have students that are participating on site in our facilities using our equipment on a regular basis. And that was key, I think, to demonstrating a need, because we showed that our students would continue to benefit from the services of an athletic trainer beyond the traditional school year. The other thing that we showed was, like I said, the documentation aspect of it. When we have students that need to go to camps and they need their physical papers, or they need, access to a doctor's note that was submitted clearing them from an injury or something of that nature. Those were all things that we keep under lock and key and no one had access to. So we showed that there were, in fact, students that were unable to participate in activities they wanted to because they couldn't get the appropriate documentation. These were the things that we started with. But I do believe, and just like you said, I think that it is very, very important to recognize that the NATA has a lot of resources available on the website. The NATA does that can assist in developing a strong argument for promoting your position and expanding that into what you want it to be and what it needs to be to best serve the student population at your school or at your facility.
All right, Josh or Woodall, how many athletic trainers do you have there at Bryan?
So currently we have 2 staff athletic trainers. We have graduate students from the Masters of Athletic Training program at Texas A&M that come out. So we do generally have 2 students assigned to us each semester. Sometimes we have 3. And then we also do have a student aid program, and we currently have 18 high school student aides.
And then the assistant there, the full-time assistant, you said, are they the same 246 as you, or?
The assistant athletic trainer is not on the 226. He is actually on a 212 contract. So just like our assistant principals, basically he works a couple weeks before school start. That gets him here right in time, a little bit before we start volleyball in August, and then works about 2 weeks after school is out. That gives us the ability to clean up our records, make sure we have everything filed and stored away, move the filing cabinet around.
And so let's go back to the state of Texas. The state of Texas, from a legal standpoint, they require athletic trainers at every school, or access to athletic trainers at every school?
There is not a legal requirement for athletic trainers or access in the state of Texas. That's something that the TSATA has looked into and been working toward over many years, dating back to when I was on the TSATA board. I was on that board for about 6 years, and that was something that we looked at and have worked toward, but it is not currently a legal requirement.
Okay, and now, so let me ask you another question. The state requires that every school have a school nurse?
I believe there is a requirement that they have access to a school nurse. It does not have to be an RN. They can be LVN nurses on school campuses. Many of our schools have LVN, not RN, but there is some level of requirement. I'm not an expert in that. I'm not 100% sure what that requirement states.
Okay, and so just so I'm clear about the differences, because for instance, Chris Shattuck is one of our preceptors and one of our clinical sites. He's also on an administrative contract, and the athletic trainers that I've talked to in the general Houston or the greater Houston area, there's such a discrepancy about, are they on a teacher's contract, are they on an administrative contract, what are the pros and cons? I had a conversation with one of the high school athletic trainers not too long ago who was frustrated that he was on a teacher's contract, but the coaches are making him stay and it's not worth, he figured out what the value was that he was making, from the stipend, all these other things. And so as you're starting, let's go back real quick, and then I want to start to transition to the, the student aids and some of the legal aspects. But as you start to make the case, and I want the rest of our listeners to understand, as you start to make the case for, we need to switch to an administrative contract, did you start to parallel with school nursing? Did you start to parallel with let's say school OT, school PT? Did you start to parallel with the other healthcare providers that the districts employ? And is that how you started to build your case, or it was just pulling from other examples that you had in athletic training around the country?
That was not the method that I used. I did not start to make that parallel with other healthcare providers in our schools. But not that I think that's a bad way to explore the options. I think that you look at what is best in your particular setting and what your administration is going to respond to, and go that route. For me, the best way to approach it was simply to demonstrate the desire of our coaching staff and our parents to have an athletic trainer on site beyond the traditional school year, and then show that there was, in fact, a need, a legitimate need to have an athletic trainer on site. And that was how I approached the situation. I think that it is a good idea to look at other healthcare professionals that are in the public school setting in your particular school and see if that is an area that will benefit you. What we did now from that standpoint, we have made some parallels in that to show that direct supervision of the athletic trainer should be someone other than a scholastic coach, because of the potential conflicts of interest in healthcare of students versus the coaching aspect of things. And we have made some parallels with the other healthcare providers employed by the school in that discussion, but not necessarily in the transition of contract.
Okay, so tell me, you started at Bryan High School when?
In 2002, August of 2002.
So you've been there for about 14 years now.
Yes, sir.
And so you get there, and immediately you started up a sports medicine curriculum course group. Tell us how you started.
Well, we had when myself, so actually Chris Shattuck and I worked together in the fall of 2002. He was the head athletic trainer here when I started, and he and I started at the same time. There was an unfortunate incident. The athletic trainer that was here previously passed away unexpected, and the assistant athletic trainer that was on staff with him did not stay following that event. So we both came in together, and so there really wasn't a lot of previous knowledge of what was going on to work with. So that to say, we did have a student aid program of sorts when we got here. There were a lot of students that claimed to be student aides. Not many of them stayed when Chris and I came in and laid down the expectations of what our program would look like. We had 3 seniors that stayed with us that year. And
how many? I love it. It's like, have you ever, what's the book? It's about Bear Bryant and the University of,
the Junction Boys?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what it reminds me of. And so your expectations, you and Chris come in, and for all those that don't understand or have never had the privilege of meeting Chris Shattuck, if he's listening, Chris is, in my opinion, just top shelf, man. I mean, this guy is outstanding. And when I heard that you and Chris worked together for some time, it made total sense, because the two of you are top shelf and total advocates for the profession. Every time I look at the two of you, you're always representing yourselves in the profession and what you're doing. Outstanding. So when that connection became apparent, I was like, oh, that makes total sense. All right. So you and Chris come in and you decide, okay, we're going to make this program look like this. And you start to outline some of those expectations. What are some of those expectations that you had?
Well, and now remembering that this was 14 years ago, the number one expectation that we laid down was that our students weren't going to just be all flies. We weren't going to have a program where the students just kind of sat around and waited for work to come to them. It was going to be a program where there was effort put forth by our students. They were going to be available for hydration at practices and helping with the hydration aspect of the football team in August. And that was probably the first thing that a lot of people didn't like, was that we established a program where instead of the athletes coming to us for water, we had water where the athletes were practicing. Mm-hmm. And that a lot of our students didn't like that idea, and they declined to stay with us at that point. But the other expectations we laid down were that our students were going to represent themselves and represent us in a professional manner. And that was to say that we had a dress code at practices and at games, and they were going to adhere to that. We did not allow them to make decisions and try to evaluate injuries or treat injuries. And I don't know that they were previously allowed to do that, but when we made it very clear that that was not part of their responsibility, some did not particularly care for that decision, and that was okay. We were happy to allow them to move on to other areas of interest if they did not want to stay and adhere to those guidelines. But we really started fresh, and that was a good thing for us, because we started, like I say, with that group of 3 seniors that stayed with us, and then we built a program around them, and from there, and we were able to develop a great student aid program where we had students that were interested in learning the art of athletic training, and possibly pursuing that as a option of study moving into their college careers. But it was clear from the beginning that they were not athletic trainers. They were student aides.
So hang on real quick. Back then, say 14 years ago or 13, 12 years ago, when you guys were just getting started, you called them student aides, or you called them student athletic trainers?
At the time, the terminology was student athletic trainer. And so, we did, they were referred to as student athletic trainers at that time.
Okay.
The standard we had set for them was very consistent with where the student aid statement is today.
Fair enough.
And so let's start to build, this model now. So you guys bring in, there are 3 seniors there, and you're really dancing around this topic of, you created a scope of work and you created some professional expectations. Now, are they getting credit for being a part of this group, or no? They're getting school credit? They
actually get elective credit for state level elective credit for at the time it was injury care and prevention was the name of our class. We have adopted obviously the sports medicine 1, sports medicine 2 program now. Mm-hmm. At the time, our class was injury care and prevention, and they were able to get state elective credit for that.
And so for people that don't understand the educational model, let's just explain it briefly, right? At the top, we've got the Department of Education. And then as the Department of Education starts to come down, we have all the different accrediting agencies of all these universities and colleges and stuff like that. And then we start to keep going down, and we have secondary school and middle school and intermediate and elementary school. And what we're seeing is that at the university level, we have students that, I think the statistic is that if I start 100 kids in college, I think 22 or 23 are going to finish. That's a horrible outcome, right? That's like if I were to say, okay, Jeremy, I'm going to give you 100 things to do, and you did 23 of them. Well, I think any of us, we'd be fired. Right. And so what ends up happening is that the universities are being tasked now of documenting all these outcomes. How many students came in? How many students graduated? How long did it take you to get through? Did you have the right courses? And so as we start to work backwards, this model that Jeremy's talking about, and I think it really got spearheaded in Texas, was that if we're able to identify some students that may have an idea of what they think they want to do going into college, they're probably going to be more successful. Now the model that we see, especially in Texas, that they have all these endorsements, right? Like I can do a business endorsement, I can do a sports endorsement, I can do a medicine endorsement, I can do a liberal arts endorsement, I can do all of this, and that's all designed so that when a student gets into college, they have a really good understanding of what they want to do. And they're not going to bounce around and jump around, and they're not going to fail out and get lost in the shuffle. They have a very clear understanding of what they want to do. So now you've got these student aides, and they've got course credit, and they have an idea, and they think they want to pursue something along those lines. And now Josh has started to develop a scope of work and some expectations. And now get us to the point, Josh, about how you start to build upon this, because now we're going to get into the topic where people are going to get, anybody that's being ruffled, everybody that's listening, their feathers are going to start to get ruffled here. Because, the NATA has put out a clear statement about this is what the student aides can and cannot do. Now, is it in your scope of practice? No. Is it in state law? No. But because that statement exists, it's now being interpreted as best practices. So somebody that understands the law can now come back and say, you're not practicing ethically because you're not following best practices. And so now start to, Josh, if you can, start to build how you all start to branch out your scope of work you said that what you were doing back then is now in line with the statement that exists now. And I want you to work into, okay, well, what do the student aides do? What don't they do? And why?
Well, our student aid program. So first of all, the objective of our student aid program is to provide an opportunity for our students to explore athletic training as a potential career path for them. And by that, I mean that our students are able to come out, they're able to see what athletic training is, what athletic trainers do, and determine if that's something that they're interested in pursuing as a potential career path in the future. And that's really our first objective. Our next objective is to provide them an opportunity to do something of interest. When I was in high school, I was not the best athlete, and I know that's hard for a lot of people that know me to understand. I mean, I look like the specimen of an athlete, but I was surprisingly enough not a great athlete, and so I love sports, and I wanted to be around that, and athletic training gave me that opportunity, and so that's another big reason we have this program. All of that to say, our purpose for having a athletic training student aid program is not to have additional athletic trainers, quote unquote, and that's because these students cannot fill that role. And so we have guidelines outlined and set forth for what those students are able to do and what their expectations are as part of the program. And I think first and foremost, one of the most important things about that is for both the student and for the coaches to have an understanding of what the role of those student aides is and exactly what they can and cannot do. And I think that's where we get into some gray areas sometimes, is if the coaches have an expectation that these students are able to do something that they're not, or if the student themselves has an expectation that they're able to do something that they are not qualified or allowed to do. Our student aides serve as in their function, they are a workforce for us in the needs of hydration. It's something that students can completely do within the parameters of a student aid program. They can be out at practices. They can help to fill the water coolers. They can help to deliver fluids to the athletes and be right there with them at practice and provide those fluids to them. As an extension of that, those students are right there with the groups at football practice, or they're on the field with the baseball team or what have you. And they do serve as an additional set of eyes and ears to help us be aware of something that we may not have seen out there on the field. If a player takes a hard hit and we weren't able to see that, and one of our student aides notices that they get up slowly, or they're not acting normally or like themselves, they come and they inform us of that so that we can evaluate that athlete. I think it's completely appropriate for a student to serve as an additional set of eyes and ears to help you be aware of something you may not have seen. No one expects one person to be able to see every corner of the field the entire time they're out there. But our students are very aware that they're not able to evaluate an injury and do that independently. That's not a part of what their responsibilities are.
And so are all these students first aid and CPR certified?
They are. State law does require that any a student participating in an athletic training program or athletic training aid program in the state of Texas be certified in first aid and CPR. And so our students are certified in that. And first aid is even stated in the NATA's position statement on this. First aid is not a protected skill.
Right.
And so those students that are certified in first aid, we do allow them to perform first aid.
Right.
If a student at a baseball practice slides for a base and has an abrasion, our students are allowed to clean that, dress it, and take care of that. But the most important thing is, and this is where I think there's some confusion, students are not allowed to make a return to play decision. And so we do allow them to take care of that first aid. They are able to perform that first aid because their American Heart Association certification allows them to do that. But they don't make a decision as to whether a student can return to practice or return to play. That's still left up to us as the athletic trainers. So I think it's a situation where we have to be cognizant of what first aid is and what first aid is not. And I think that's where some confusion comes in.
And so you bring up a really good point. Some of the discussions that I've had, especially surrounding some of the student aid programs, is, well, what can and can't they do? You know, and I've heard, well, you know, I have them tape an ankle. And my response to that is, you know, they're all CPR and AED and first aid certified. And so that qualifies you as a first responder. And so what can a first responder do and what can a first responder not do, right? A first responder surely can act on abrasions and identifying life-threatening situations, initiate CPR, AED, all of those other things. If I were to call 911 and a paramedic or an EMT were to jump out of the back of that ambulance because I have a sprained ankle, they would provide some first aid for me, which includes what? Probably identifying that there's an injury and giving me some sort of compression and, you know, rice or you know, a bag of ice and saying, you know, go pursue some care with your healthcare provider. What they wouldn't do is do a full comprehensive orthopedic evaluation. They would not make some return to play decisions or return to activity decisions, and they surely would not apply any protective bracing, taping, etc. And so as long as people are functioning in that frame of you know, mind frame of this is what a first responder does and this is what a first responder doesn't do, not only are you if you do somehow breach that, one, well, now you're legally responsible for anything that happens. Two, you're going against your own Practice Act. Three, you're devaluing your own services that you're providing. So if you can, Josh, keep expanding on, you know, conversations that you've had, not only internal in your own school and in your student aid program, but with some other high school athletic trainers in your area. What are some of the roadblocks that you've had and what are some of the successes that you had?
Well, I think, you know, you hit on a big one with, you know, expanding on the first aid versus not first aid. I think I've had a lot of conversations with people about taping, student aids, taping athletes, whether it be for an injury or whether it's for just preventative measure if an entire team is taped or those that want to be taped but don't have an injury. And the question's been posed to me, you know, what do you think about, or is it good for a student aid to be able to tape in that situation? And you know, my response to that is that it's acceptable for a student aid to practice taping if that's a skill that you're teaching on a non-injured person in a classroom setting. But to allow a student to apply tape as a preventative measure or as a treatment is something that we don't do in our program, and I don't view as an acceptable use of a student athletic training aid, because you are in fact performing athletic training services at that point, and a student aid is not qualified or credentialed to be able to provide athletic training services. When we look at our graduate students that are actually studying athletic training at the master's degree level at Texas A&M and come out and work with us, they are allowed to provide taping. But we have to have direct supervision of those individuals while they're doing it, and until they've been determined competent in that skill. And then even once they've been determined competent in that skill, we still have to be on site. They're not able to go out on their own independently and do that. And I'm not going to allow a high school student aid to perform at the same level as I would one of my graduate students who's actually getting a full education at a master's degree level in athletic training. I think it's not good practice to do that. Not recommended for sure. But you know, that's a conversation that I've had with some people, and I think that you know, as the profession grows and expands, and as we learn more and things change, sometimes it's hard to wrap our heads around that and move along with this. But I think when we sit back and we look at it, some of these things are very understandable.
So I personally, just me as a person, like with my kids, if I'm using a screwdriver in the garage and he says, "Hey Dad, can I do that?" I say, "Yeah, come on here, let me teach you how to do it." If I got a 5-year-old that knows how to use a nail gun with an air compressor, because I just say, "Yeah, right here, let me show you." Sure, that's fine. And so for me personally, as a teacher, like I'm going to show my kids, my students, how to do it, because for me, that's empowering in giving them an opportunity to learn and to experience new things. And it creates drive. Now, I understand what you're saying as far as they're not paid to do that job, so they shouldn't be doing it. It's
Well, it's not only they're
if
not
we were
being
to
paid, they're not
transition,
licensed or credentialed to do it.
so if we were to transition to the, where they're not taping, it's going to be just difficult. I'm not saying I'm completely against it, but I'm not really saying I'm for it either. So it's kind of, that's why I want to have this discussion to understand more.
Right. So let's go back to some of these student aid programs. Why are they developed? Right. They're really developed to help with the workforce. I mean, let's just kind of put it out there, right? And
Correct.
so there are two ways that you can look at it. One is we're going to develop these student aid programs because we need more of a workforce on the ground floor, right? We need some more worker bees that can do some of these other tasks, and it'll free you up to do some other things. All right. From my perspective, right, looking at the 20 or 30,000 foot view, I look at it and I say, well, wait a minute, let's go have a conversation with administration, whether it's going to be your principal or your school board or stakeholdership or, whatever it is, and talk about why we need more credentialed athletic trainers, not why we need more students, why we need more credentialed athletic trainers. So I think one of the bigger issues is that as a profession, and this fifth practice domain would show it, the fifth practice domain for you guys that aren't in the athletic training education world, 2017 is going to change a little bit. It goes to healthcare administration and professional development. Right now, it's organizational health and well-being and professional development. So it's that fifth practice domain that really comprises about 12 to 13% of what we do as a clinician. And so a lot of athletic trainers just don't understand that. They don't understand the marketing component. They don't understand the fiduciary management component. They don't understand return on investment. They don't understand all these other things. What they're looking at is, I have to get a job done. I'm tasked to do this job. And the easiest way for me to do it is to bring in, these students, give them credit, and they can help do this. All right, fine. What Josh is talking about is they're not credentialed. So the idea, the example that I always give is, let's say, God forbid, something happens and you show up to a hospital, ER, you have to go in for surgery. And the college student that is thinking about going into medicine is the one that's going to do your operation. You feel comfortable? I wouldn't. They're not credentialed to do it. Now, obviously that's an extreme example, but it shows the example. So one is having a scope of work. Two is, as athletic training keeps pushing itself into the medical model, which we're doing a great job of doing, especially in today's healthcare model where everything is focused on population health. So as we keep pushing into that, how does allowing a high school student to do your job help promote you as a professional and show your value when the people that are evaluating you aren't really from medicine, they're from athletics, and they're saying, okay, well, for instance, Jeremy, and I don't know your situation here, but Jeremy, geez, if a 15-year-old high school student can do your job, then why should I value you?
So you just talked extremely highly about Chris Shattuck, one of the best student athletic trainer programs I know, right? Top notch, like you said. Those kids know, there's a reason they won the Quiz Bowl at the GHATS workshop, because those kids know stuff. They practice stuff. They're involved. They have to work hard, just like Josh was talking about the program they developed there. So if we're pushing forward, if I'm training up kids, that's the thing I don't understand is how do I train kids and keep giving them incentives to learn and keep giving them things, but then say, but you can't ever really do this.
Well, it's not that they can't ever, right? So let's take it out of athletic training and put it into engineering or chemistry or something along those lines. Let's say that in my school, I've got an engineering group, right? And they're learning about physics, and they're learning about how materials move and energy is absorbed and dispersed and all those different things. And they're doing experiments in the class, and they're doing experiments as part of this lab, and they enter contests and they win and all these other things, right? Are they building the bridges that you're driving on? No. Why? Because they're not really qualified to do that, right? And
right.
Would you feel comfortable, as smart as some of these kids are, would you feel comfortable getting in a car driving, knowing that, well, I hope they did it right? Why? They haven't gone through the education They haven't gone through that thought process of understanding why and why not. And so there are a couple, from an educational perspective, there are a couple things that I always look at. One is, I'm a huge fan of Bloom's taxonomy, huge. And so for those outside of education that don't understand Bloom's, there's a taxonomy that you go through, right? Remembering, understanding, applying, evaluating, analyzing, creating, that top level creating. And so as we start pushing our athletic training students through these models, I'm talking about at the college level and now in the master's, they're able to think at a higher level. They're able to think more critically. And we talk about more critical thinking. This is now a differential diagnosis, right? Is I know what it is and here's what it's not. And at that basic level, nothing against the high school students. I think it's outstanding that it's happening. But at the basic level, they just don't have the knowledge and skills to do it.
And I think to kind of expand on your answer a little bit there, Josh, Jeremy asked, how you keep them motivated and how they're going to continue to do that if they're not allowed to actually practice what they're learning. And I certainly see the argument or the question there. And what we do, or the kind of the way that I would address that, and the way I do address it with my students, is that we teach the skill. They practice on each other in a classroom setting, and anytime that they want to practice and they want to continue to do that, if we have time after practice and we're sitting here waiting on rides to come pick up students, we'll break out the practice tape and let them tape each other and continue to practice that skill and continue to hone in on it. Generally speaking, the students that I have that think they may want to pursue this as a potential career path, and they think they're going to go to school for this, they're going to really have that drive and that desire to practice it, because we've had the conversation with them that these are the things you're going to learn in college. These are the things you're going to have to be proficient in if you want to be an athletic trainer. And so they continue their drive is internal to want to continue to build that, because they anticipate they're going to use those skills when they get to college and potentially be a step above where some other students that come in with them would be. What we don't do is allow them to practice on athletes. And I think part of the reason, for me, one of the biggest reasons that I don't allow our students to tape athletes is because if I have a kid that doesn't have an injury, but they're wanting to be taped as a preventative measure. If that student sustains an ankle sprain in practice and they were taped by one of my students, I'd have a really hard time explaining to the parent when they ask, my child was taped, how did this happen? I'd have a hard time explaining to them that, it can happen even if you're taped. Taping's not a foolproof way to prevent an ankle sprain. If I do it, I can say that, and they can question my ability to tape an ankle, but I can show them that that's a qualification that I have. If one of my students tapes it and they ask the same question, I have a hard time explaining to them that, it wasn't an error in the way the ankle was taped. It was just a freak accident that, the ankle was taped and they ended up with an ankle sprain anyhow. It becomes more difficult to explain that situation to a parent. And then taking that a step further, because our scope of practice and because the NATA's position statement says that this shouldn't be done, if somebody were to file a complaint, because their student suffered an ankle sprain, even though they were taped by a student, I'm held to that standard of care that I shouldn't have allowed my student to tape that person, and that can have an adverse reaction if when somebody's reviewing that formal complaint.
So our legal counsel actually commented on this, and she said in her opinion, the best thing to do is to go with the NATA position statement, because arguments can be made either way. All right. So, and again, I like I said, I don't really agree with it because I like to teach the kids. However, the reason I had this conversation, the reason I do this, the sports medicine broadcast, is for me to grow and for me to not be stuck in a hole. So what I'm saying is the NATA has, like Josh said, a best practice, right? And so it is in our best interest for liability reasons to follow that. However, here in Texas, according to what she told me, that there is, I should have I highlighted it, but in Texas here, all school district employees, including ATs, enjoy something called statutory immunity under Texas Education Code. It provides that a professional employee of the district is not personally liable for any act that is incident or to or within the employee's scope of duties, and that involves an exercise of judgment or discretion, except in circumstances where disciplining a student, the employee uses excessive force of their negligence leads to personal injury of a student.
All right, wait, hang on. Go back.
The whole thing?
No, go back to like the previous sentence. You exercised some judgment.
Exercise judgment or discretion.
Stop. You exercise judgment or discretion.
Okay.
Based on best practices. And the NATA, which is the governing body, organization, right? They have clearly defined what best practices are. So let's take it out of this realm. Let's put it in something that, you know, is probably a little bit less controversial. There's a lightning storm coming your way. And you have a lightning detector in your hand. And best practices based on the NATA position statement says, if lightning is X miles away, then I should probably get out of the environment that I'm in. Whatever, that's 6 miles, 3 miles. You know, I don't remember exactly.
UIL says 6 here.
Yeah, 6. Fine. And so, but now this lightning storm is right on top of you. And, you know, Zeus is just throwing these bolts down. And somebody gets hurt. It wasn't law. It's not law that it's in there, but it's best practices. And somebody got hurt. Did you follow best practices? Are you no, you didn't. Are you legally responsible? Yes. Same. It's
right, but that's what she said is cases can be made either way because it's not clearly defined in the law. And then, you know, again,
but I mean, I can't imagine that, you know, if we look at case law, you know, you can bring up tort, you can bring up errors of omission, you can bring up errors of commission, you can bring up negligence, breach of duty, all those other things. And so if I'm, like, for instance, one of the bigger cases that are out there, I think it happened in San Diego, California, where there was a student athlete that came off the field with a sprained ankle or some sort of lower extremity injury. And, you know, that athlete was cleared to go back in. Now, I don't remember the exact details. Either they were cleared by, you know, a student or whether that was an athletic training student at a university. However, they go back in and they weren't fully functional. And sometime after that, they sustained a catastrophic neck injury and became a quadriplegic. And so that's one of the bigger cases. Now, the district settled. And they paid the family, you know, a huge, you know, sum of money for this. But, you know, really, this is about mitigating as much risk as you can to avoid negligence. It's also about making sure that you're promoting your profession. So, I mean, there are all these different things that are happening. This isn't just a one answer solution. This is one of those things of we're talking about how do we promote education in the secondary school level and what kind of experiences should we provide. 2 is we're talking about what our legal obligations are as a profession, right? 3 is that we're talking about what's ethical in terms of patient care. 4, we're talking about valuing, right? What's the valuation of what we do as athletic trainers, and how do we protect our skill set, and how do we keep growing? So, you know, we're talking about 4 or 5 different themes. And now all of a sudden this is the perfect storm, right? They're tying all into each other. And so one of the questions that I heard was, well, you know, like, Josh, you have 2 athletic trainers for how many student athletes?
We have roughly 900 student athletes. And
so, you know, this is inappropriate, you know, healthcare provider to patient care. And how do I know that? Well, because if you look at some of the ONA formulas, there's a very clear formula about what you can use to say, for X amount of patients, I should have X amount of healthcare providers. And so now it comes back to, well, how do I start to decrease, you know, this gap? and my roles and responsibilities are being taken up with X, Y, and Z. And so the conversation needs to be started, just like Josh went to his administration, about, look, it's in the best interest of everybody that I move to an administrative contract. That way I'm much more available and I've got some more freedom and autonomy to do what I need to do in the best interest of those student athletes, right? And then he brings up another great point about, our student aides. Well, they're all first responders. Beautiful. What does that mean as a first responder? I can mitigate, the easiest risks. And what are the easiest risks when we're out there? The easiest risks are, well, if I need to start CPR, I can, and I can protect against dehydration. And I've got all these other eyes now that can funnel information back to me, and I can start making the best decisions possible as a healthcare provider. And so if we look at the medical model, that medical model is really no different than what we see, right? In the hospital system, we have the physicians. And who do we have underneath the physicians? Well, we have, other what we call physician extenders. I know everybody's going away from that word, but we have LVNs. We have, first of all, CNAs, right? Certified nurse assistants. And we got licensed vocational nurses. And then we have RNs, and then we have PAs, and we have nurse practitioners, and we have ATs, and we have PTs, and we have, social workers and speech pathologists, and all these things are there. Why? To help the physician do a better job, right? There are more eyes, but ultimately that final decision comes from the top. In the athletic training world, that final decision comes from the top. And it's inappropriate, both from, and in my opinion, from a legal standpoint, from an ethical standpoint, to allow students to make decisions that, quite honestly, we went to school for a long time. We're required to keep our credentials up, our licensures up, all those other things. That's just where I stand.
So not to harp just on the tape thing, because the tape, I think, is the biggest sticking point for most high school athletic trainers, because you said the workforce. So, but on that, in our educational domain, is taping an ankle one of the proficiencies?
Yes.
So for your Master's of Athletic Training program, there's standards for how to apply the tape.
It's not how to apply, but protective bracing and taping is a clinical integration proficiency. Yes.
Right. So
because there are, it doesn't say anymore, when we were coming through, it was like, okay, 3 strips here, and let's get away from that. Let's look at it globally. If you're taping an ankle or a wrist or an elbow or whatever it is you're going to tape works and it's functional, then who am I to say because I saw it in a book and it should be done this way? So if it's fun, right, there are 100 different ways to skin a cat as long as it's functional and it provides the end result, right? This is the reason why, we have a Lockman, we have a modified Lockman. Why do we have a Lockman? Well, the anterior drawer is less reliable. Why? Because of the hamstring, right? All these other things. So let's go back to the tape. Does it tell you exactly how to do it? No, but protective bracing and taping is an NATA, educational competency, and clinical proficiency. Period. End of story.
Yeah. So then,
that means you've been taught.
Yeah.
And supervised
currently. So of course I didn't prepare for this, but when was that put in? Because I've seen lots of tape jobs. For a while. When I did my internship with the Texans, the tape job that they do on them is terrible. It's like putting a sock on. Like how is that?
Okay. Well, let's go back to, first of all, the medicinal functionality of the tape. It lasts for
15 minutes,
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
So let's just say, this is something that I've always asked. Let's say I'm going to play a game at 7. I tape them at 4. By 4:20, we're done. But there's a proprioceptive, a mechanoreceptive, a nociceptive component to this. As a matter of fact, I can show you evidence that, well, if we went from taping to protective bracing, ankle braces, the outcomes are probably pretty similar. So why are we even taping?
And if I may, discussing the taping, one thing that I would say to consider when it comes to that, because I do understand, in situations where you're taping an entire team and you've got 1 or 2 staff athletic trainers to make that happen, it's an unrealistic expectation. And so you do need additional hands to be able to help you with that. I think that one thing that can be done is to use this position statement and to demonstrate to administration that you need more credentialed athletic trainers on staff if this is the expectation that we're going to tape every athlete. I think you can utilize this to demonstrate that, per my governing body's position statement, I cannot use a high school student to serve in this role. And although it's going to obviously be met with opposition, I'm not naive in thinking that the coach is going to say, "Oh yeah, well, okay, never mind, we're not going to tape everybody." But I also think that as the argument's been made, as long as we continue to say, well, we have to use the high school students to do this because otherwise it's not going to get done, then it's going to continue to be acceptable to administration and coaches that high school students can do the job, so we don't have to pay another employee. I think it's important to demonstrate that if not from a legal, from an ethical standpoint, I can't allow this to happen, and therefore we're going to have to make modification, whether that's additional employees, less people being taped, whatever that modification is, we need to look at that and address it. But I think that's something that can be where this can be used to benefit the clinical athletic trainer versus looked at as a hindrance.
So again, I am for the moving forward, the increasing the number of athletic trainers in the high school setting, and that's why we're collecting hours. We're doing things that I think that I've heard will benefit us in getting that done. But part of my job description, I actually, contact human resources. My job description says to develop student athletic trainers, and it says managers, right? So obviously we need some updating there. But if part of my job description is to develop student athletic trainers,
Define develop.
then that's my question is what if I go to administration and they say, well, you don't need more adults, you need to do a better job of developing.
Define develop.
Students.
Well, yeah, I think the argument there is I am developing these students. We have a classroom setting where we're developing their skills, and we're teaching them the skills and the art of athletic training. But develop doesn't mean practice.
Say that last little part there, Woodall. I think my bell for some reason cut you
no
off.
problem. I was saying that I think that the discussion with administration would just need to be that I'm developing the student athletic training aids by teaching them in a classroom setting, allowing them to practice skills and hone those skills. But developing them does not mean utilizing them in a clinical setting where it would be a violation of ethical practice.
All right. So I got a comment from somebody in the chat room says there's a reason that a lot of Texas athletic trainers are dropping their ATC, because then that makes the governing body the UIL Medical Advisory Committee and not the NATA. Can you speak to that at all, Woodall?
Sorry, what was the last part of it again? I heard dropping ATC, but I missed the rest.
It says that's why a lot of Texas ATCs or a lot of Texas athletic trainers are dropping their ATC because the governing body is the UIL Medical Advisory Committee and not the NATA for high school athletic trainers.
Well, the governing body is not the UIL Medical Advisory Committee. The governing body would be the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. Mm-hmm. The UIL Medical Advisory Committee puts forth recommendation for UIL policy, but does not govern athletic trainers. TDLR would do that under the new state legislation. It used to be Department of State Health Services Advisory Board of Athletic Trainers, but and the advisory board still exists under the Texas Department of Licensing. Anyhow, I don't know that we have a ton of Texas athletic trainers that are dropping ATC credentialing. We have not seen a drastic reduction in the number of Texas members. That said, I certainly understand that there are some that have chosen or maybe considering dropping that ATC credential based on these recommendations. And I think that's a decision that has to be made. Still, I think we're going to we still need to just look at what is the best practice for athletic trainers. Here's the thing, an argument that I hear a lot of times is people complain about the wage that they're paid in their setting. And one thing that I tell a lot of people is that the kind of bad part about that is that some athletic trainer somewhere always takes that job that pays $25,000 a year. And as long as somebody's willing to take that job, then there's no incentive for employers to raise the rate of compensation, because they're able to find somebody that they can pay $25,000. And I think the same argument can be made when talking about the use of high school student aides. As long as we're using high school student aides to do the job of an athletic trainer, then what's the incentive for employers to hire additional athletic trainers that are credentialed and are able to be of a much more valuable asset to the program and to athletic training as a credentialed provider if administration sees that students can do the job.
I have to leave here in about 2 minutes because I got to head back, but I'd like to hear some more questions because it would seem to me, and Josh, you know more about this than I do. If you go back to obviously the regulation of athletic training coming from TDLR, they're basing a lot of that regulation. They're scaffolding some of that information to what other states are doing, and the other states are really being guided by the national governing boards of athletic training. Correct?
It is state dependent. Many athletic training, or many states that have athletic training licensure is based off of the BOC credential.
Right.
Texas is one of the few states that has licensing outside of BOC certification. But I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, well, I mean, you brought up the BOC, certification and those practice domains and all those other things. So whenever I hear somebody that says, well, I'm going to drop my national certification, why? It's all really coming from the same area. And so I don't like some of these decisions that are being made. Oh, okay, but these are being made from a national perspective in the best interest. There are all these other outcomes. So I'd love to be able to hear just a couple more questions, and then I gotta head back to work. But I'm hoping that the two of you continue on with this discussion, and I'm willing to bet that this is probably going to be a 2 or 3 part series.
Yeah, probably. Because I don't think we got to but one thing, and that, again, I didn't want to focus on the taping, but for here in Texas, at least, that seems to be the biggest catch point, because that's what we use the worker bees to do part of that. And so again, there's a lot of arguments back and forth. I know one thing we didn't even get to. Well, real quick, just to be fair, some of the cases that you sent me that you put in the show notes, one of them was an athletic trainer didn't recognize the signs and symptoms of concussion, and then they sent a student athletic trainer with the kid to the hospital, which is bad practice anyways. It needs to be an adult, right? So to me, that for the sake of argument, it doesn't have anything to do with student athletic trainers. Because the student athletic trainer didn't report back to the athletic trainer.
But that leads into appropriate continuum of care, right? Not at all.
But in the discussion of student legal concerns with student programs, that one didn't seem to apply to me too much, unless I just missed something.
I looked at that as a continuum of care.
All right, so explain to me.
A continuum of care?
Yeah, like what did I miss there? Because to me, that seems like just a poor decision on the athletic trainer and nothing to do with.
In my opinion, when I was out before I went into academics, I never sent a student with anybody, because to me, I wanted a credentialed healthcare provider with that patient. Period. End of story. And so to me, I look at that as that's not best practices, right? Because when that student athlete, when that patient gets to the hospital, I want somebody who specializes in what we do to help with that continuum of care. How many ER physicians know that, if a football player is in full equipment, how many of them know how to navigate around that? They don't. I mean, there's some data out there that would support, I think it was like 96% of ER physicians don't know how to properly diagnose a grade 1 ankle sprain. So, in my opinion, to send a student in that continuum of care, well, is there a state law against that? Is there a national? No. Is it best practices? No, it's not. And, I always think about, right, I've got 2 kids, and I've got a 15-year-old son and a 11-and-a-half-year-old daughter. And let's just say they have to be transported to a medical facility, and a student is riding in the ambulance with them. I don't want that.
Yeah.
I want somebody who's credentialed. That way, when they get to the hospital, right, that credentialed person is able to speak medicine, right? Because that's what we are, right? We're healthcare providers. We speak medicine. And now I'm in the village of medicine talking with other people that live in the village with me. And I'm able to speak medicine. These are the signs and symptoms. This is what I saw. This was how we did appropriate care. By the way, if you're still in a helmet and shoulder pads, I'll help you, right, remove the helmet and shoulder pads. I'll do all of these other things. Not to mention that if I'm going to relay information back to the parents, well, I mean, let's just put it out there. If I have a student relaying some information, well, now we violated HIPAA and FERPA type thing. It starts to compound itself. And this is where I think people need to really think about. One is, I always take the standpoint of, if this were my son or daughter, my wife, my father, how do I want? What kind of care do I want? And then the second part is, my family is dependent on me doing my job so I can get the paycheck. And, we have a house, and there are groceries, and my kids are going to have to go to school pretty soon, college, and I got to save for that. And we have car payments, and just like everybody else. Why would I want to expose any of that to undue risk, liability? I want to mitigate as much risk as I possibly can.
So on that, what I understand now is that possibly having a student athletic trainer program and putting responsibility on them, or developing them to a certain point to where you feel comfortable in them, quote unquote, doing your job, is what would make you, or encourage you to make a decision like that person did. In all reality, that athletic trainer was responsible because they sent a kid when they should have sent an adult.
Ultimately,
but because they felt the kid was responsible enough, they sent them.
Yeah, one of the things that we do at our university, and we got some slack for it. When an athlete needs to be transported to a physician's office, something like that. Well, it's always been kind of commonplace that the student would transport. We stopped it. Our MAT students will not use their own vehicle to transport any student athlete anywhere, period, end of story. Why? Well, if they're in a car accident, who's responsible for that now?
The driver.
Right. That's not fair to put that on a graduate student who is, going through graduate school. They're not working. They're assuming all these student loans, all those other things. So if we really think that we need to, drive a student athlete to a doctor's office, which is a whole nother discussion in itself. I don't totally get it. But, well, how come the university isn't providing that service? And if you want the student to do that, that's fine. Let's go to the Office of Risk Management, have the Office of Risk Management put all of the students through a defensive driver course, all of it, and that the university will make sure that there's an umbrella policy in terms of liability, that when a student is driving a university vehicle and something happens, the student assumes zero risk and zero liability. It's the university that will pay for it. I don't have a problem with that. But it's not fair. Oh, hey, can you take this?
Right.
But
it's been done. It's always been done.
And it's not right. And that's the point, is that if we are going to be in the village of medicine, right? And we're going to act medicine and behave medicine and speak medicine. I mean, could you imagine if your treating physician started to, well, geez, I couldn't do this test, so I'm just going to do that. Or, right, there's a professional ethical responsibility that we have. And as a profession, we need to understand, it goes back to that fifth practice domain. We need to understand terms like tort law, omission, commission, negligence. We need to understand words like return on investment. We need to understand different funding models. So not only do we need to be able to speak, behave, and act medicine, we also need to be able to speak, behave, and act business. And, now the discussion gets to start. because now we can go and we can start to advocate not only for great student athlete care, but to say, hey, look, now we have more athletic trainers. We know we have access to more athletic trainers because the people that are making decisions about our jobs, they find so much value in what we do. You know, before I leave, I was watching the Today Show before I left for work today. And one of the episodes was about, you know, the race in Texas for like the high school football stadiums. There's a football stadium, I think in Katy, it's like $60 million. Okay, well, the question is that they have the funding to 60, they all of a sudden found 60 million, but when it comes to the health and safety and welfare of your student athletes, you can't find an extra 75,000, 80,000. All of a sudden it disappears. But if we understand the business of medicine, well, now we're able to speak the same language, right? Because we're able to develop outcomes and we can show purposes and all these other things. So that's my soapbox. I got to go.
All right, Josh, I know Yellen, you got to go. Woodall, you said you got a meeting you got to head to.
Woodall, it's always a pleasure, brother.
Hey, it is always a pleasure to talk. And if I can't briefly before we take off, you know, I want to make sure that I'm clear and everybody understands that I'm a high school athletic trainer. I have been for 14 years here in Bryan, and I understand the hardships that we're all under when it comes to staffing and having to figure out ways to get the job done. I've taken a little bit different approach with my student aides, and I do utilize them as a workforce, but I utilize them in the ways that I can and that I can feel comfortable with. When we're in the athletic training room taking care of the healthcare needs, the taping and the preparing for practice or games, I have my student aides out filling up all the water, setting up the sidelines, you know, getting all of my equipment in the right places, and making sure all of that goes. There's a sense of ownership that they take in those things because they know that they're responsible for making sure all of the equipment we need to provide the best possible healthcare to our athletes is there and available at the time that we need it. And that's not to say that I don't go behind them and make sure that we have everything that we need. I mean, I'm going to check before every practice to make sure the AED is where it's supposed to be, or that the splint bag is on the back of my cart. But those students are responsible for getting all that set up, and that's a utilization of student aids that I can do. And it takes the burden off of me to make sure that part of the job gets done before going out to practice. That said, or to a game or whatever it might be. That said, you know, I think that, and I'll try to be brief in what I'm saying, but I think that what's important to realize is that many times I have conversations with people about, you know, wanting to be recognized as a healthcare professional. Why are we not recognized as a healthcare professional or more recognized? Or how do we get higher salaries? Or how do we get more athletic trainers into our setting, more help? And I think the first key to doing that is looking at other healthcare professions. Now, I realize, and I'm the first to say, we're athletic trainers. We're not physical therapists. We're not doctors. We're not nurses. We're athletic trainers, and I understand that there's a difference. But if you look at any other healthcare profession, there are not high school students in a physical therapy dictating rehabilitation exercises or setting people up on those. There's not high school students in the doctor's office, you know, taking X-rays and applying casts and reading X-rays and doing those things. We have to be cognizant of what we're doing and how those high school students are being utilized, keeping in mind that we want them to have a good experience and we want them to be involved, and we do want to develop their skills and their interests and give them the tools to move forward and be successful beyond high school. But if we're going to grow as a healthcare profession and demonstrate the value and provide a situation where we can argue for higher wages and more athletic trainers to provide better care, we've got to get to a point where people understand that high school students can't do our job.
Right.
I think that's kind of.
All right. I got to go.
Yellen, give us a sign off here. Yellen, go ahead.
Go check out the University of Houston Master of Athletic Training Program. Look us up, www.hhp.uh.edu/MAT. And we have a brand new promotional video on it, and I want the two of you to watch it.
Done it.
For the Sports Medicine broadcast, this is Dr. Josh Yellen, Josh Woodall, Jeremy Jackson. Thank you. Let me know. I'll be back again. Bye.
Dr. Yellen, always a pleasure.
Yes, sir.
All right, Josh. Someone wants to contact you, find out more. Woodall. Someone wants to contact you, find out more. Where can they do that?
Yes, Josh Woodall. You can contact me on my my school district email address. That's just Josh, Woodall, WOODALL @bryanisd.org. Happy to answer any questions. I'm always available.
All right. So great, Josh. Thanks for jumping in. And like Yellen said, I think we're gonna have to continue this conversation. There's several other topics dealing with this. Student athletic trainer program and legal concerns we're going to have to hit. I know this summer at the sports medicine update that's put on by Memorial Hermann, they have an attorney coming in to speak about this same topic. So if you just happen to be there June 13th and 14th, then maybe we can snag the attorney and have a conversation where we always do our broadcast there. But, if not, then I'm sure Yellen will have plenty of questions and comments there. So Josh Woodall and Bryan ISD is BRYAN. So it's like Bryan, Texas, Bryan ISD, just in case. So,
yes, absolutely.
All right, Josh, also the president of SWATA. So you could tweet, it's at SWATA D6, and then I'm sure that would get to him eventually.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you very much for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to come back and continue the discussion whenever you want to do that.
All right, Josh, well, you head to your meeting, and then I'm going to close it out.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I appreciate it again.
Thank you. Okay, so of course, like always, there is the school health gift card, which I recently sent out an email. They want to know if we want to switch it up and make it a monthly, a bi-monthly, or quarterly, and just increase the value of the gift card with a longer period of time. So check that out. If I send you that email, make sure you check it out, get it, respond to it, or don't. It's whatever it is. Let your vote be heard. If there's no change, then we'll just keep it that way. I really am interested in learning more about this topic. Again, I am a high school athletic trainer. I work with students. I want to teach. I love to let them do things rather than have them sit and watch. And so making a transition like this would be very difficult for me. And I'll go ahead and admit I've made fun of the athletic trainers that just say, no, your students can't tape. Or whenever somebody sends their kid over, can you tape my athlete for me? Well, you're a student athletic trainer. Why can't you do it? They're sending you to the game. Well, whatever. And so the thing is, I've got to really take a step back and look at, I don't want to do this because I've always done this. I want to look at what's best. What is going to be best? And if not having students tape means that we have an extra adult certified person here on campus, then I'm willing to make that sacrifice. But I don't know that it's proven and shown that not having those students developed brings extra adults. I think part of how they really see the value in athletic trainers is the programs that we develop, the way we interact with the kids, the leadership we provide with those students. So it's really a difficult situation for me to just understand and jump one way or the other. So as they were saying, we're probably gonna have to schedule a round 2 or 3 or 4 for this. And then definitely hit me up with your questions. I know there was a couple here in the chat room with Carlos, Izzy, and Katmar that we didn't even get to. And so we're going to get to those eventually, I hope. But continue to send me those. And, if there's somebody else that you have in mind that would be good for speaking to this topic, again, we're not arguing, we're just discussing so that we can learn, then give me in contact with that person. How to get a hold of me on Twitter. It's PHS SportsMed. My email, the best one for the podcast is info@sportsmedicinebroadcast.com. So info@sportsmedicinebroadcast.com, or Twitter, PHS SportsMed, sportsmedicinebroadcast.com / has all that stuff. So this episode, sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/legal concerns. That'll also have the contact information for Josh Woodall and Josh Yellen. And again, my job description as a teacher, as an athletic trainer, my contract, and all these different links that we discussed. So it'll have it there in the show notes for this episode. Again, sportsmedicinebroadcast.com /legal concerns. So this time for Jeremy and Josh Woodall, Dr. Josh Yellen, and some of my sports medicine kids. That is a wrap.